Hello, welcome to our research club presentations. My name is Kitio Anthony. I'm from Team Big Tory. Team Big Tory is supervised by Professor Lee Sanga from the Department of Preventive Medicine, Kangon National University. And I'm the team leader. And I have worked with Mr. Choi Pyongun and Miss E Jong-un. We shall be presenting about association of cardiometabolic factors and insulin resistance surrogates with mortality in participants from the Korean genome and epidemiology study. Our project has already been published in BMC, Lipids in Health and Disease. The objective of our topic was to investigate whether surrogate indices of insulin resistance are more important in predicting mortality than basic cardiometabolic factors. Insulin resistance is a state where insulin as a hormone is not responsive, does not stimulate the actions it's supposed to stimulate. For example, extracting glucose from blood. So someone who has insulin resistance will have excessive blood glucose in their blood. It's a state called type 2 diabetes. So insulin resistance is a risk factor for other diseases such as cardiovascular disease, cancer, and mortality. However, insulin resistance is very problematic to measure, quantify. So accordingly, several researchers have developed what they call insulin resistance surrogates. These are computed from the basic cardiometabolic factors such as fasting blood glucose, triglycerides, HDL cholesterol, BMI, and waist circumference. So you can see the first insulin resistance index is TYG, the triglyceride glucose index, which is computed from glucose and triglycerides. Other indices you see such as TYG BMI, TYG waist circumference, metabolic score for insulin resistance, the cell adipose index, and lipid accumulation product. All those are insulin resistance surrogates. However, there is no research to show that it is necessary to compute these indices. We don't know whether these indices are better predictors of mortality than the cardiometabolic factors that you see on the left. Okay, so we set out to determine whether insulin resistance surrogates provide more predictive information for mortality than the basic cardiometabolic factors that you've seen on the left. Our research used data from the Korean genome and epidemiological study, or the 한국인 유전체역학 조사 자료. We studied over 100,000 people, men and women, aged 40 years, actually 40 to 79 years. Our major outcome was mortality from all causes, from cardiovascular disease and from cancer. However, in this presentation, I have summarized the results for all-cause mortality to save time. We ascertained mortality from death records from the National Statistical Office. We used Cox regression adjusted for other risk factors of mortality, such as smoking, drinking, age, sex, physical exercise, and other risk factors of mortality. We used restricted cubic splines to visualize the relationship between cardiometabolic factors, insulin resistance surrogates, and all-cause mortality. And then we used the likelihood ratio chi-square to compute the amount of predictive information provided to the model by each of our exposure factors. When you look at our results, we visualize the association. On the left, we look at the association between the cardiometabolic factors and all-cause mortality. So you can see based on the p-values, the p-values show us that there are non-linear relationships between blood glucose, which shows a J-shaped association with mortality. Triglyceride shows the same association, J-shaped association with mortality. This is HDL cholesterol, shows also a J-shaped association, reverse J-shaped association, where you see a decrease in mortality risk as HDL increases up to a certain point where it starts to increase. Then you see a U-shaped relationship between BMI and mortality, and a J-shaped relationship between waist circumference and mortality. On the right, you see the association between the insulin resistance surrogates and all-cause mortality. We also see non-linear associations between these indices and mortality. U-shaped association between 2YG index, VAI, lab, and metabolic score for insulin resistance, and the J-shaped association between 2YG BMI and reverse U-shape between 2YG waist circumference and all-cause mortality. In summary, we see associations, non-linear associations between cardiometabolic factors and insulin resistance surrogates with all-cause mortality. Next, we wanted to quantify the amount of predictive information added to the basic model by cardiometabolic factors and insulin resistance indices. First, we build a baseline model containing age, sex, education, monthly income, marital status, smoking, drinking, physical exercise, and disease score, and high sensitivity C-reactive protein. It's been shown to be a predictor of mortality, so we added it to the model. So we first build this model, and then we add each variable to this basic model, and then quantify the amount of new information provided by the model using the likelihood ratio chi-square. So we get the log likelihood of the baseline model and divide it by the log likelihood of the model, including whatever we want to measure its predictive information for. In this case, for example, triglycerides. So what we compute is the AI, or the adequacy index. Okay, the adequacy index. Now, when we get to 1 minus the adequacy index times 100, we can quantify the percentage of new information provided by the model. So looking at this data, we can clearly see that glucose provided the highest percentage of new predictive information to the baseline model. Okay, so it was glucose followed by body mass index, and then metabolic score for insulin resistance, and then TYG BMI. For cardiovascular mortality, still blood glucose, fasting blood glucose provided the most predictive information. And for cancer mortality, it was blood glucose that provided the highest predictive information to the model. So we can conclude that we observed non-linear association between cardiometabolic factors and insulin resistance surrogates with mortality. And then we demonstrated that fasting blood glucose provided the highest predictive information to mortality than surrogate measures of insulin resistance. If you go back to this table, you can see that these combined indices provided less information than blood glucose. So the conclusion that we can draw is that surrogate measures of insulin resistance do not provide additional predictive information for mortality beyond fasting blood glucose. Therefore, we can see that blood glucose can be utilized as a simple and less expensive predictive and preventative marker of the future risk of premature mortality, and therefore recommend that fasting blood glucose should be routinely monitored in the general population. In other words, we can conclude from our paper that it is not necessary to make computations of insulin resistance markers from the basic measurements when our major objective is to predict mortality risk. Thank you so much for listening. I remain Chitio Anthony on behalf of Big Tory.